Today we're talking about temporarily inconvenienced millionaires. Um, I've had the displeasure of knowing quite a few of these people. Uh, they're kind of everywhere. Um, it is a very frustrating way of thinking because they will want to perpetuate ideologies and political philosophies that basically screw over 99% of the populace, but help 1%. So, like, for instance, they'll be against like higher taxes on very, very wealthy people, like over 400,000, which is not that many people. But then will be um, uh, only voting for that, where they get lower taxes on the very wealthy people, but then everybody else has to continue to pay for things at the same rate. And the idea that these people have is that, well, I might be not making that much money now. I might be making 50K now a year, but later on, when my business takes off or whatever they think is going to happen, um, I'll be making, millions of dollars, and then I'll be in that tax bracket. And I don't want to get screwed over because I'm going to be the 1%. So I'm going to have a contingency plan for that by making sure the government system is set up in such a way that I benefit from it when I get to that position. Um, this is a very frustrating thing to deal with because it's so pervasive and it's so deeply unhelpful for most people, including themselves, most of the time. There's a reason why most people don't become rich, and it's in part because there's so many things going against them uh, by the rich, um, to kind of not let these things happen where you could make a ton of money, but you won't. For instance, there's been a lot of writing about how it's actually more expensive to be poor because you can't buy things in bulk. You have to permanently rent. You can't own a property that accrues in value, etc. Um, so you run into these people where they actually, and I think for the most part, most people are good people. They're trying. They they think they care about their fellow person, um, and they do care. They're just so out of their depth that they don't realize that not only are they not helpful, but they're actually counterproductive. So they think, well, I don't want to screw over all the entrepreneurs um, by making sure that they don't just I want to make sure they don't just succeed. I want to make sure they wildly succeed to the point of it being comical. in comparison to the normal person because that's the incentive structure that they think is effective. Never mind the fact that like it really isn't. Like there's more things than just money that incentivize people to do things. And plus, the difference between making 400,000 and 600,000, it's difficult to say how much more that's going to influence someone. That is a very context dependent thing. Like if you um, are aiming to make 400,000 and then the temporarily inconvenienced millionaire type thinks that it's a bad thing to I'm sorry, if you're aiming to make 600,000 and the that type thinks it's a bad thing to start taxing those people once they make over 400,000. So after the taxes, they go back down to, I don't know, 500,000 or something. Um, they tend to think that this will make a difference in terms of like the ambition of the person when that is highly context dependent. First of all, the difference between 400,000 and 600,000 is a lot, but you're already doing so well that most things are not relevant to you at that point. You can already afford a house easily. You can already afford the food that you need easily. So, in other words, the difference between 400,000 and 600,000 is a lot, yes. But the relative difference between that and, let's say, 20K and 60K a year, that difference is much numerically smaller, but it is actually a bigger difference because the buying power is substantially different. With 60K, you can do a lot more things that are basic necessities than you can with 20K. So, in other words, the people who feel like you're getting screwed over if you were originally without these tax plans that start taxing the rich, if you were originally going to make like 600K and after these tax plans you now make 500K, where they feel like they're getting screwed over, A, that's not true, like at all, because you're doing just fine, thanks. And secondly, um, a lot of this is like, to my eye, it's like, how am I doing compared to my neighbors? Like, well, if my neighbor makes 600K and I only make 500K because of the stupid government, and now they took all my money, then it's difficult to feel like that grievance is equivalent to the grievance of not being able to pay for food, because that is what these kinds of tax policies do, not being able to pay for housing. Which would you prefer helping? Which person would you prefer alleviating the grievances for? The person who is struggling with the deeply awful um, grievance of, oh, well, now because of this tax policy, I can't keep up with the Joneses. And next door, they got a bigger boat than I did. And now I'm jealous or envious, I suppose. Or I can't afford a house. Gee, to me, this really is not that complicated. And the fact that it is quite frankly embarrassing for people who say they care about other people. And I think they do. I think they just don't know what they're talking about to, again, an embarrassing degree. It kind of reminds me of, I've touched on this before, but I've met a lot of Christians. I mean, I know the most about Christianity because I live in the States. Don't meet many Muslims or etc. But anyway, I've met a lot of Christians who just claim up and down that they deeply care about people. They really care. Jesus is love. They just care. And they want to tell you about the gospel because they really care and they think it's a saving message, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all this rot. And the hilarious thing is, according to these people, now again, there are certain sects of Christianity that do not believe in this or that thing, but the average Christian, the ones that I've talked to, certainly, they believe that more than two-thirds, because um, more than two-thirds of the world is not Christian. Um, Even more than that, when you consider the ones who believe in what they believe specifically, because there's hundreds and hundreds of different sections of Christianity or whatever, um, are going to burn forever, forever. And yet we are told, and they think that they have a loving ideology. They have an ideology that is best and loving and kind and compassionate. And yet the majority of people are going to burn for eternity under their view. It is absurd when you are awake to think that that is remotely ethical at all. It's the same thing with these people who, like I was saying before, favor government programs that benefit 1% of people, of which they are not even comprised most of the time. The bulk of the voting populace, by definition, who support these stupid policies are not even in the 1% that they are trying to get to. They just think, oh, I'll get there eventually. Oh, I'll get there eventually. And then I can just coast for the rest of my life. So I'm going to make these, like, it is any policy that screws over the majority of people in favor of a very small minority. It's a little difficult to see how that would be an ethical policy. Certainly, if you go by utilitarianism standards, which is what I pretty much go by. I'm going to have to explain my specific view in another video, but it's embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. You get these Christians who say that God is loving and that, he'll give you forgiveness. Really? Really? Does burning forever sound like forgiveness to you? Oh, well, you rejected him. Oh, you mean on the bad evidence that he gave? On the laughable evidence? It's it's one of those things where you almost have to stop thinking about it because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and it's so dismal that it's depressing how far gone these people are.